My guest today completed his undergraduate degree in kinesiology in 2004 at Memorial University, and his Master of Science degree in kinesiology, concentrating in corrective exercise and orthopedic rehabilitation through A.T. Still University in 2016. Michael is currently pursuing, listen to this, his second Master of Science degree in human nutrition, concentrating in functional medicine and nutrition through the University of Bridgeport. His academic background and commitment to continuing education has provided him the opportunity to work in both clinical and non-clinical populations. Such skill sets have allowed Michael to help individuals presenting with an array of diseases, functional limitations, and disabilities. He says a large percentage, around 75% of his business includes strengthening individuals recovering from injuries. Such a process must be approached in a slow and pragmatic fashion, as this population requires delicate exercise progressions and intensities suited to their pain tolerances and tissue capacities. Welcome, Michael McIssac.
Greetings.
Michael, Michael, the expression no pain, no gain. Can you just talk a little bit about that for a minute?
I'm on your side. Pain is subjective, and perhaps it's safer when you do experience pain to perhaps stop whatever is replicating it. Because you don't know the mechanism. You don't know what it is. It could be a sore muscle, or could actually, and not to be fear-mongering, but it could be cancer. In fact, that happened to me with a client a few years ago. After they finished up with me, they had back discomfort, and it ended up being cancer. Everyone was doing their best, but when they did deeper, I guess they call it differential diagnosis, they found it out. Now that statistically is very unlikely. Let's just put that in perspective. But the whole point of it is that we should ignore it. We shouldn't pass it off until, if it is there, we'll certainly avoid things that are inducing it or, making it worse, certainly. But maybe reach out to a good medical pro and figure out what is the nature, what is the cause, what's the mechanism, because then they can actually give you something that's meaningful and useful to work around it or to fix it.
So when you talk about pain, and sometimes people, it's their first time to the gym, and they may overdo it, they may not, but usually the next day or even maybe the next day after, there's a fair bit of stiffness there, right?
It is, yeah.
What do you recommend for, because some people will say, well, I feel like a board today. I'm really stiff and I'm sore, but I'm going to the gym anyway. Is that a subjective thing too, or do you just push through it and
That's excellent. That's a really good question. Well, they call it DOMS, or delayed onset muscle soreness. We think that it's just some kind of let's say that in English. Let's do it in English. Heavy lifting makes your muscles sore.
Okay, perfect.
There you go. Sorry, folks that are listening.
Yeah.
Pull me in, Gary.
No sweat.
Yeah. So that happens, and that's a natural consequence of activity. Generally speaking, when you engage in activity on a frequent basis, that level of discomfort usually resides or titrates or lowers down. It's usually not as intense. You're going to see that kind of thing when your training is very infrequent. I.e., okay, I'm going to come in, I'm going to have a good workout Monday. Guys, see you next month. Right? So, but now to answer your question though, but what do you do with it? It's not wrong to come in. It's like a diffuse or spread out kind of general soreness. Similar to if you did some shoveling, if that's what it is, I think you're okay. When something's really sharp and pronounced and or it's located towards a joint, that may be a different thing. And you're going to know intuitively. You're just going to know the difference.
So pain doesn't necessarily mean stop.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't mean stop, but let's be sensible and reasonable about our approaches is essentially what I'm saying. If you have just general sore muscles from a good workout, come on in, do something.
Sure.
Probably not heavy lifting again, but there's really three principles that should be guiding principles for people. You have to move, you have to have good nutrition, and you have to have some kind of means of recovery. Now, if you, as an aggregate, if you're embracing all of those things, you're going to do just fine. But it's when and where you apply those principles that are relevant. So if you're sore, it doesn't make sense to come in and do that again. Maybe you go for a walk. Maybe you have a nice warm bath with Epsom salts to get some magnesium in there to chill out the muscles a little bit.
So just
maybe do foam rolling.
I'd like to talk about that too,
Sure.
as you introduced me to that. But just explain the science, because I've heard of a warm bath with Epsom salts.
Yeah.
Can you just explain the science behind that?
Yeah, briefly.
Right? Yeah.
Briefly. So essentially you have, in the muscle tissue, you have a couple of different substances that allow muscles to contract. Calcium gets in there and it has a reaction, not to get too deep into the actus and myosin cross bridges. Sorry, people, but that's more for the nerds that are listening. But essentially, calcium gets in there and it interacts with small fibers and allows it to contract, okay? Epsom salts have magnesium, and we think that it moves in transdermally into the blood, and it's a way of getting magnesium in your system. Why is that relevant? Because that's an electrolyte that competes with calcium in the muscle. And in English, if you have enough magnesium, calcium can't get in there and make the muscle contract, and it relaxes.
Okay.
Or you can just have foods that are rich in magnesium too.
Which are?
Nuts and seeds, leafy green vegetables, things like that.
So diet is important as well.
Yeah, you can't, I know we're coming in here talking about movement and exercise, but you really, as you can see, you simply can't ignore them. They all have to coexist at the same time, movement, nutrition, and some kind of means of recovery. Has to.
Michael, you talked about a means of recovery. Can you talk about that? Because some people just don't take the time to recover even when they're in pain.
Everything comes at a cost. Let's use an extreme example to contextualize what we're talking about. So if you have someone that does nothing at all, ever, okay, that will come at a cost because the body will adapt for better, for worse. Okay, what's a simple example? Well, this is great. So what happens to us in the wintertime in St. John's, in Newfoundland? We lose our tan because there's no sun. And quite frankly, I doubt we're going to get a tan this summer. Yeah, so when it comes to adaptation, for better, for worse, the body's going to do exactly that. Okay, so the example that I use often is talking about sun. If the sun's not out, you get pale. If you are out in the sun, you will generally develop a tan if you have levels of melanin or things that allow you to tan, right? Like a redhead may not tan, bad example, right? But they do get benefits from the sun that are useful. But so it's that idea of adaptation. So if you have somebody that does not do anything ever or gets hurt and decides never to move again, maybe temporarily that's useful because it allows perhaps inflammation if it exists to come down and the pain to reside if it's there. But then taken to its extreme, that sedentary behavior absolutely feeds into the original problem. It does. It's called there's a name for it, a fancy name, but it just means like when you do nothing, it's likely to get worse. It just happens.
What I read somewhere that 2 or 3 months of activity can be undone by 2 weeks of inactivity. Like, does the body the body doesn't reset itself back to zero with a certain level, say 2 weeks of inactivity? You're not back to before you even started, or does it adapt that much?
It depends on how inactive you are. Let me put it to you this way: I had ACL surgery a few years ago. Right? So, they went in, they put a new ligament in, everything's good. But I had to stay off it for a little bit. And I had to do very basic movements. Very basic. So I was doing some stuff, but not as much as I did before.
Sure, yeah.
Within a matter of days, you're seeing atrophy or a loss of muscle size. So absolutely, depending on how sedentary you are.
Sure.
Like if you're in bed, lying down flat, you're going to get degeneration fast. I think that is very safe to say. It goes fast. If you're not giving the body a reason or putting some kind of healthy stressor on it to stimulate some level of change or positive adaptation, it's efficient.
Well, you look at someone who's had a cast on their arm or a
Same
cast
thing.
on their leg. I mean, when they take the cast off, I mean, the leg is so much smaller than the other leg. Can you just explain a little bit more about, when someone experiences discomfort, pain? I mean, I guess that's a fine line between what people have as far as pain tolerances go. But, if it's to the point where maybe it's impeding your normal everyday work and it maybe persists longer than what it should do.
Yes.
So can just talk about that and maybe people can get a little bit of a better understanding of what this discomfort and pain they can do with it.
Yeah. So, again, if I might have mentioned it before, a little bit hyper, that's normal. But if a pain is very sharp or very focal, it's probably not the best type of discomfort. If something's very general and diffuse and spread over a muscle, that's probably just the muscle soreness associated with physical activity. So if it's the first one, you really have to be mindful when you're doing the movement. If it replicates it, avoid whatever that is. Okay, so here's an example. Here's the dilemma.
It's like the story. The guy goes into the doctor and says, when I move my arm like
Yeah.
this, it pains, and the doctor says, "Well, don't do that."
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for that deep explanation, right? Yeah, that shall guide me from here onwards. Thank you. Exactly. Well, yeah, you know what? Despite all of the science and the research and the experience that you do to try to understand and appreciate this stuff, it comes down to very, very simple steps. If it hurts, don't do it. There it is. If it hurts, don't do it. If it's really sharp, don't do it.
Because that's your body telling you something, isn't it?
Yes, because we don't know, again, the mechanism, right? Back when I was much younger, I had an uncomfortable shoulder, and I just ignored it. I pushed through it. What it was is I didn't have good posture, and I was creating impingement, or in English, I was grinding metal on metal. I should have taken that at the time and said, wow, boy, oh boy, maybe it's important to learn how to press things overhead. Dare we call that functional, right? An activity of daily living, to be able to push things, to be able to pull things. Those things are all important, but then the question is, if it hurts you to do it, is that particular pattern now a viable option for you? I would suggest no, it's not. And so you should just do everything else and then go to someone that can actually find out why that's happening.
Right, not just ignore it.
No. You shouldn't do that. That doesn't make sense. If I could speak to my 20-year-old self, I would absolutely have done that. Right?
Because we tend to ignore things as we're younger, don't we?
Oh, my gosh.
Thinking that it's going away.
Oh, and none of us, not even exercise professionals, we experience these things too, right? Like I hurt my knee in jiu-jitsu a few years ago, and it was uncomfortable, but I was like, oh, it just must be something on the outside. I should have absolutely went to a good medical professional to figure out what it was, but I didn't, right? And I worked through the pain. So we're not, we're just as susceptible to this too.
Sure.
It's very hard to sometimes be absolutely objective on yourself, but that's why you have good friends and other professionals to give you a good crack on the shoulder and say, smarten up and get that checked.
Reel you back.
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. So, I mean, we all experience those things. But, there's some basic principles. Once you figure out what hurts, work around it. Very simple, okay? If it hurts you I've worked with clients that have like frozen shoulders, so it's very uncomfortable for them to reach overhead, so we just don't do it. But that doesn't mean we can't do lower body. It doesn't mean we can't do core. It doesn't mean we can't lift and carry things.
We heard the term. Many people hear the term frozen shoulder.
Yeah.
Can you? What are the symptoms? Can you just explain what it is? Because some people may have frozen shoulder and not even realize. They have it, right?
It's a little bit. To be clear, it's a little bit out of my scope. So this is more for a medical professional to sort of expound upon or talk about. Okay. So, but generally, the joint or the capsule or the ball and socket, it's just generally stiff, and there are surrounding structures around it that inhibit its ability to be able to, say, reach out in front of you or overhead. These are very provocative patterns of movement for people with pain. So I'm just in the studio here reaching my hand overhead, folks. Yeah. So that's what it can be. And different postures can make it worse too. Sorry for cutting you off.
That's okay. And if you can't do those normal arm up and down, sideways, backwards, that's an indication that there could be something inhibiting that movement, which is more than likely muscular.
Yeah, or skeletal.
Okay.
Yeah, or it could be deep in the joint. It could be any or all of those things. That's why good differential diagnosis is key, and finding a good medical professional to figure it out. We desperately need to have exercise professionals and medical professionals playing on the same team because it's about the client. And we're doing pretty good here in St. John's. It takes a while to figure out the people that you want to work with. When you find those teams, it's very valuable because then they know that you're going to work around the injury. You know they are going to work directly on it. But what that means in English to the client is they get back on their feet faster. We have like a lot of, and I use this term affectionately, like a lot of nerds in St. John's, and that is who you want to have on your side of the ring. Find the nerdy one, go with him or her.
Because they're passionate.
Yes.
Right, and they're involved in their work and they love their work.
Totally, absolutely. And they understand the value of an interdisciplinary approach. You have to. The body is an absolutely complex system, right? You're not your heart. You're not your you're not your intestines.
Yeah.
It's multiple systems working together. It doesn't mean we ignore specific areas, but we always come back to that goal is it's a singular system. Make sure it all works as optimally as possible to maintain homeostasis or health. Navigate your landscape, and that really boils down to this. So we said, use pain as a guide, right? So if it feels good and it looks good, do it. And the opposite's also true. If you can't quite do it right and it hurts, avoid. But, exercises should be looked at as tools. That's all. That's all it is. And then you need to look at that tool and go, okay, is that appropriate for what I need to build, whatever that is? Okay, so generally when clients are coming in, we need to work on very basic things. Basic movement patterns, let's just call it that, and I'll explain what that is. Activities of daily living, to be able to squat up, to be able to lift something, to be able to carry something, to be able to push and pull something. Everybody needs to know how to do that in varying degrees, but everybody needs to have those things. And I believe that the exercises and motions and movements that we do should acknowledge that and make those things better.
I mean, you just think about people shoveling snow. People shovel snow, but they don't necessarily do it the right way.
No, but there it is. But so then it comes down to a question of durability, right? You can still perform. It doesn't mean you're healthy. Health and performance are different. They're both relevant and important, but they are different things. Because health, if we define it, it's freedom from physical, mental, social illness, right?
I think one of the issues that I would love listeners to understand is we don't exercise. We don't go to the gym because of going to the gym. We do it for an end result. We do it because we want to make our lives better. We want to be able to live better. We want to be functional. We want to be able to mow our lawn. We want to be able to shovel our driveway. We want to be able to lift the grandkids up.
Yes.
And that's really what the motivation is for everybody, to be more active in life. Really, if you really brought it down to the core of all of this, is that's what you want to do, really, isn't it? You want to be able to dance with your granddaughter at her wedding, right? You want to be able to get into the swimming pool and swim with the kids, when stuff like that, right? That's really what it's all about, isn't it?
You're nailing it. You're totally spot on. That's the whole. Maybe you wouldn't be surprised because this is your area, but a lot of other people might be surprised that when clients are coming in, especially post-rehab clients, ones that were injured, their requests are so humble but yet so important. Mm-hmm. I want to be able to hold my grandson. Right. I heard this one. I want to be able to carry groceries.
Right.
I don't really get, I want to shovel the driveway. That's usually one that people are quite happy to pass off on someone else. That was a bad example.
It was
Gary.
bad. It was.
That was a very bad example. But they're very simple things, but that you can tell that they want them. When you strip someone of their abilities to do basic things, their thirst to get it back is so high. It's crazy high.
Health. Really, having your health and being able to do the things that are normal daily activities are so critical to our mental health. So, Michael, one of the issues I'm sure that you see is you have an active person and an inactive partner, and the active person is getting their partner to bugging them to try and lead a more active lifestyle. What kind of advice can you give to those people? Can pushing a person like that too far cause problems?
These are great questions. So I think if something's very low level, like if someone wants to just go for a nice windy walk, I think you're going to be safe. I think, right? But if you're engaging in higher order activities, things that are very complex, gym-based exercise, driving your heart rate up high, well, then maybe that's a different answer. And I think that's why it's relevant, especially if you have a previous medical history, to maybe run to your family physician and just ask him or her, like, how are my blood tests? How are my biomarkers? Am I okay? Is it safe to train? And then they will say yes or no. And that's one level of entry. The second level of entry, if you so decide, when you're speaking to a kinesiologist or exercise professional, is that when you sit down with them and explain what your goals and your desires are, I think it's extremely important that that particular person that you're sitting down with have a good detailed medical history on you, that they have a medical questionnaire.
Because you were saying you have about 100 questions you ask people.
Oh, goodness, yes. It's actually over 100 questions. And you can't commit those to memory, but yet they're so relevant. And they seem rather innocuous to the person that's looking at it. Like, why are you asking me about my breathing or if I cough? Or why are you asking if my stomach hurts? Well, because maybe that's a really important question. I mean, you mentioned here that you get dizzy. That could be just an example. It's like, well, and then what that encourages me to do, you see, is to ask more. Well, I get dizzy when I lie down because I have vertigo. Well, boy, oh boy, maybe that means I shouldn't have them lying on their back if they come in.
Sure.
That's nice to know.
Yeah.
Or if you find out that they, one of the other questions might be, do you wake up a lot at night? Is your sleep really poor? Do you wake up with a racing heartbeat? I mean, that might point towards some kind of sleep apnea. Maybe. maybe. But at least what it does, it starts a discussion with your client so that you can go a little deeper and it allows you to develop a much more responsible and comprehensive program for them. And it also gives you the opportunity to refer out, which is not done enough, and it needs to be done, to refer out. If something comes up on that questionnaire, you're like, ooh, I don't know what that is. They're saying that they're having very serious digestion problems. Maybe they have loose bowels a lot. Well, if that's happening a lot, that essentially means that you're not soaking in a lot of nutrients. That in time can create a problem. That's nice to know. Maybe you should refer them back to their family physician or someone else that can address that. Because we discussed earlier that the body is a pile of systems that are working together. It might be important for them to come in and do 3 sets of 10, right, for different reasons. But certainly that's not a very effective way of addressing all of the needs that the person has or might not know that they need.
So you brought up a good point. So there's 2 questions I've got for you. 3 sets of 10, free weights or machine?
Awesome question. Excellent question. Totally relevant. Look, the bottom line at the end of the day, half a loaf's better than none. Period. So if you're coming in and you're doing something, that's still better than sitting back doing nothing. Now, everything comes at a cost. Machines are really good because they're safe and they have a predetermined range of motion. That is true. So it is safe, but it also is limiting because the body moves in these large, robust, and complex ways, right? Think of the range of motion of every joint in every, like, almost infinite number of ways that you can move, all relevant and depending on your environment and what you need. Machines don't allow for that. Secondly, they don't really nourish the sensory motor system. All that means is your ability to receive information from your environment, put it in through the system, and dish it back out. You don't get a lot of that nourishment when you're sitting down with machines. When you are handed someone a stability ball or a dumbbell or a barbell, so many more levels of coordination have to be recruited. These things called synergists that are deep muscles that stabilize the joint. All of these things collectively work together. But ultimately what that does, it feeds forward into activities of daily living because that's exactly what you have to do when you go outside.
Exactly, right.
Right?
So obviously free weight's much better than
time and place.
Machine.
Time and place.
So my second question is, explain what does a foam roller do?
That's a great question. So we'll just in general use the term self-massage tools to include foam rolls and to include the massage bar that looks like a bread roller, if you're wondering, or a massage ball. Essentially all it does, or it's not all, there's a few things that it does, but one that it seems to be pretty effective in is decreasing our perception of pain. Pressure over the tissue increases the ability, the threshold of these little receptors that tell us we're in pain. So over time, you have to produce more pressure or more exertion to get the same level of pain. So it raises the bar so you don't slip into a pain mode as fast. And about 30 seconds of rolling over these devices seem to downregulate that pain response. And actually, locally, we've had some great research done by MUN. Now, here's the other side of that story, too, is that this soft tissue work, we can call it that, too, or self-massage, whatever you like. Not only that, but when you have muscles that are tense or tender, you can't produce, we call it like motor control. All that means in English is you can't move as smoothly as you could as if it were not there, that particular trigger point, if you want to use that term. And so you don't get as much force production. You're not quite as strong when these are present. And it also helps downregulate that a little bit. So you get smoother motions so that you get less perception of pain. That all sounds like really good stuff, and it sounds like things that you need before you engage in an actual workout itself. So it's like part of a complete breakfast, basically, is the first thing that you do before you start.
How long daily do you foam roll every day?
You can, and it's totally fine to do. And there's no hard evidence on this, but I heard a sort of like a strength coach on the front line say this one time: for every 10 years of life, 1 day of soft tissue work. Maybe that's a fun way of looking at it. 1 day
a week?
Yeah, precisely.
Okay.
Yeah, that might be a way of looking at it. So, if you're 50, give me 5 days of rolling over the particular regions that bother you.
If you're 80, that could be a problem, right?
I'd like to retract my statement. I do not know math clearly. I'm only kidding. That was amazing.
So, Michael, Quantity versus quality. You hear sometimes people saying, "Oh, I just spent 3 hours at the gym," and other people say, "Well, I was there for half hour, 45 minutes." I always say quality is much more important than quantity, but I'd like to get your take on it.
It's a good question. Time itself is not totally relevant. It's what we're doing in the context of time, right? But, you can get a lot of work done in 60 minutes. You really can. I do it every day, right? To include the warm-up, to include the soft tissue work, to include something that we call corrective exercise. Those are just movements that improve any restrictions that I might see. To include the actual workout itself, 60 minutes easy. And you can do a lot of work, especially depending on how you design the actual program and organization of exercises. There are things called supersets or pairs or trisets. Little tricks where you put exercises back to back and you cycle through them, and that increases the workout density. You get more done in the same period of time.
Michael, what about weight training, resistance training? How important is that? Because we all know we lose muscle mass over time, so it's important. I know you can't reverse it, but it's important to kind of slow that process down, isn't it?
Well, it comes back to this whole concept. If you're not creating some kind of stressor on the body, or what we call a hormetic effect, like something that encourages the body to adapt and overcome something, it'll stay where it is. So if you're weak, and we identify muscle weakness as a limiter to you be able to do things, then obviously we need to do something to create a change. So if that's the case and that's the situation, you do need to strength train. You do need to do that. And the same is true for one that doesn't have really good cardiac output.
Mike, one of the things that I get people, and we're almost out of time, but
Sure.
Can you just quickly address how can people get a better night's sleep?
That is probably the single most important thing than any other thing. It's at the tip of the spear. It's at the top of the pyramid. You mess with that, and it has this cascade effect on everything we're talking about. So is it important? Yes. How do you do it? Well, there are a couple of different tricks to improve your sleep hygiene. Lights, flat screens inhibit your ability to produce melatonin. They slow it down. Melatonin allows us to sleep. Okay? It initiates sleep. So one thing that I think is brilliant, you can't tell people to turn the lights off in their house, but you can do something where you get an amber-colored glass, sunglasses, amber-colored, not yellow, amber. And you put those on, and they filter out the light that comes from the flat screens and overheads. It's called blue light. Okay, and I think the frequency is 550 nanometers. If there is a physicist out there, correct me if I'm wrong. Okay, but that particular wavelength that comes from these lights, they slow down the release of melatonin. So my answer to that is you can get these amber-colored glasses anywhere, and they filter it out so that you get that natural sleep pressure coming on.
So these glasses, when do you wear them? Obviously not while you're sleeping.
3 hours before bedtime. I think this is brilliant. That's one thing. The second thing is probably try to eat several hours before sleep. 5 or 6 if you're going to bed. If you're eating at 8 and you're trying to fall to bed at 9 or 10, that amount of food in your gut is definitely going to keep you up. So those are like two major players. It's not the only things.
Mike, great conversation.
My pleasure.
It was great to have you here. Can you leave our listeners with one final tidbit, and also your contact information?
Sure.
How would they get in contact with you?
No problem. I think that I stole this quote from a client of mine, but it's never too early and it's never too late to engage in exercise or some kind of movement. Okay? It's never too late, never too early. So keep that in mind. If you're 50 or 60 and you think, oh, well, all is lost, no, it's not. The body is an incredibly resilient organism. It can bounce back. It can definitely do it. It just has to be, you just have to do it in a pragmatic, systematic fashion with some level of steps involved that allow you to move into what you want in a safe and efficacious fashion. Excuse me.
Contact information.
Yes. You can get a hold of me. You can Google my name, McIssachealthsystems.com. And everything is there. And on the website, it's everything about my services.
You got videos there? and
Yes, that's under exercise progressions with an S.com. So that's a video library of just basically my brain on the internet. It has a breakdown of every exercise that I implement with clients. And there's a free blog section on both websites. Everything about exercise and nutrition, over 300 posts, or close to, excuse me.
Great, Mike. Thank you very much for taking time to come in and talk to us. We'll be back next week with another interesting guest. Bye-bye for now.